Right, we're going to take apart the wind chest now. A lot of dirt accumulates down and dust accumulates down in here through the pallet rods down to the pallet valves. We want to clean the reed beds. We want to make sure everything's in good shape. So we're going to start by removing all those linkages first around the outside. So we have the knee paddles on the left and right. We have a bracket here for the keyboard. We're going to remove these covers. Remove the pallet rack itself, and then up underneath here we have the mutes, so we're going to remove these mutes. We'll take all of that apart, and while we're doing that, we're just going to keep track of where everything goes so that we can get it all back. Once you've seen it disassembled, it's kind of easy to tell the parts, but if you were to be handed a bucket of all these parts to begin with without knowing what it looks like, it might be a little bit hard to figure out where they all go. But as you take it apart, just keep track of what you're doing. There's a bunch of little pieces, these little clips here. You know, if you want to label them or put them in little bins or something to keep them all separate, that's a good idea. Especially when you come, we're going to lift out all these and we want to put them all back in the same place. We want to make sure that in case there is any variation in the length, that it doesn't affect the keyboard. And we end up with a bunch of lopsided keys, some of them sticking up or some of them down a little bit. So just keep track of everything you do on this one because there's a lot of parts. There's 61 reeds on the front and 61 on the back. And then we got 61 pallet rods and 61 pallets. So the numbers add up here. So make sure you keep track of what you're doing. So now we're going to take off these swell paddles here. They lift up and expose the reeds for more volume when you press the knee paddles out. And they're pretty easy to take out because you just have one clip here. You disconnect that clip, and then they're in slots, and they just pull straight out. You want to be careful with these because there's foam on this edge, and there's a big piece missing from the foam there, but that's okay because this is just blocking the volume. It's not really like the bellows where you want to keep the air in or anything like that. So that's not going to let out too much extra noise. But when you lift them, then you'll get a lot more volume. And there's also a foam paddle on the back side here. So I'm going to actually remove the screw here. This hook is kind of tight. I'm going to remove the screw, and then I'll just slide these out. Okay, we're going to take off the pallet rack so we can take the pellets out and clean them and clean down in that channel there. The ends of the rack are held on by 3 screws that come up from underneath. But we can't just take those off because the way this is made, you can see it down here, that curve there, and then you can see it's right up tight against that. So we can't lift it off because it's caught by the 2 mutes. So if we try to lift it up, we've already taken the screws out, but if we try to lift it up, it hits on the mutes. And even if you lift up the mutes to try to move them over a little bit, there's still not enough room. So the first thing we need to do is remove the mutes. We're going to take off the screws here. Just going to take off one side of the hinge. I'll take off this screw, these 2. And then there's a wire here that acts as a spring to keep the mutes closed, and that just is going to pull out from here. So we have 4 mutes, the front treble, front bass, rear bass, and rear treble. I want to make sure I label them, so when I take these hinges off, I'll just put a little label underneath the hinge here. So I'll label this BF for bass front, TF for treble front, TR for treble rear, and BR for bass rear. That way I get them back in their same place. They're pretty easy to orient because the trebles are longer, so they would go on this side, and then once you figure that out, it's pretty easy to figure out whether they're front or back. But I'll just put a label in there anyways, so you keep track of it. With the mutes out of the way, I can now unscrew the 3 screws from up underneath the wind chest. So there's 3 screws there. I unscrew those, and then once those are unscrewed, which I've already done, then I can just, I've got one nail here, which I've also pulled, but then I can just lift this off and take this right off. With the rack and the mutes out of the way, now I'm able to remove the pallet rods. They just lift out, and I want to keep these in order, so I'm just going to put them right back in the rack. Just lift them out one at a time. And then when I get to these here that don't have any coupler, I built myself a little cardboard rack, put some numbers on it, I labeled where the C key was. I'm just going to lift those out one at a time as well and put them in the holes. And that way, if I want to move this rack, all the pellets won't fall out. I can just carry these loose pellets in this little cardboard container here. We're ready to remove the reeds. Want to make sure we get everything inside cleaned out. And for that, you need a reed puller. I just made one here with a little piece of aluminum. I flattened the end of it, and then I bent it over, and that will fit right in that little indentation there. Just pull it, hook that down, pull it out gently. Once you get it all the way out, pull it out. Now you're going to want to number these and set them aside. You don't want to mix them up. You would think they'd all be from one length, gradually getting shorter and shorter and shorter as you go up to the treble. However, several of them are the same size. So if you pull out one here, it's a little tight, as they can be. And pull out this one. You can see if you mix them up, it would be very hard to tell. They are stamped, but don't let that fool you either. I have several that are stamped side by side. I'm not sure if you can see it, but I have two D's side by side, and I think what they did was they just tuned the D to the C, or vice versa. So make sure you number them and keep them in order somehow. We've got the wind chest down to the bare minimum. I could take off these hinges, but I think I'll leave them. And these reed beds are glued onto the wind chest top, so I'm not going to disturb those at all. The felt's in pretty good shape, a little bit of dust in it, but overall it's in good enough shape that I'm not going to worry about replacing that. If I were doing this as a professional job, of course I would probably replace all of the felt throughout the whole organ. But in general, most of the felt and leathers are in good shape on this organ, so I'm just going to leave it as is. You can see how dirty it is. I'm going to see what I can do if I can clean that up a little bit, maybe with some Murphy soap oil, but I do want to be careful. Got a nice label there, which has the date of manufacture and the serial number, so I don't want to disturb that. So I finished washing the top here of the wind chest. I used Murphy's oil soap and a slightly damp rag. I didn't do a lot to change the color, but now you can at least see the grain. Before, this was all just a dark blackish brown color, but now you can see the grain, and you can see the amount of dirt that's coming off. So it was a Murphy's oil soap and a damp rag, another damp rag to rinse, and then a final dry rag. I don't want to get it too wet. I certainly don't want to saturate the wood, just basically enough to get the dirt off the surface. Even though you can't see the hinges, I decided to polish them up anyways. I did that because I polished these two hooks here and they look so much better. I thought, well, I might as well do the hinges as well. So I did the hinge. Not a perfect job, but it's good enough. But I also want to point out that these hinges are not symmetrical. You can see that the one side is shorter than the other, so when you take them off, make sure you keep track of the orientation so that you don't mix them up and put them around the wrong way. Otherwise your mutes won't be able to close all the way. Now that everything's been removed from the top of the wind chest, we can come in here and flip it over and remove the pallet valves. Each pallet valve is held on by two guide pins, one here and one here, and then a spring actually pushes down on it. So we're going to just lift that spring up, move it off to the side, and pull the pallet valve out. We're going to number each one of these. Now I already did this before, but I'm numbering this one and one here on the frame, just so I know which way they go. I want to keep each one in orientation. After I move that pallet valve out of the way, I put the spring back, and once again, the next one I just lift the spring, set it off to the side, pallet valve gets lifted out, and I label it number 2. And I'm going to keep track of all of these all the way across. This is the inside of the wind chest. It's nice and clean. I've taken off the pallet valves. And you'll notice that these pins have some crud on them. And these pins here are nice and clean. I think that's because when the pallet valve opens, it tends to rock this way and more air comes in through here. As the air comes in, it accumulates on the pallet valves. So I'm just going to take a regular brass brush and give each one a little bit of cleaning, and then this will be ready to go. After using the brass brush and then feeling them, I could still feel a little bit of pieces that the brass brush didn't get. So I just got myself a little piece of wood here. I just run it along the bottom and then along the top and a little bit on the sides. And now it feels much better. There's no more crud sticking to it. So nothing fancy, just a little piece of wood. You can see some of the green corrosion that's coming off the post still. You want to be real careful. You don't want to bend these because they hold the pallets in place and the pallet has to slide freely up and down. I finished cleaning all the pallet valve pins. You see got quite a bit of corrosion off. A lot of it fell down in here, so I'm going to make sure I vacuum out this or blow this out real good because we don't want any of that dirt to get stuck on the reeds once we put them all back in place. Everything's been removed, labeled. It's time to start cleaning. Once we get them all clean, we'll reinstall them in the case and be on our way. So on each of these pallets valves, the leather and the felt, so there's a layer of felt and then a thin layer of leather on top of that. They all look pretty good. They're quite dirty with soot, as you can see. These I haven't cleaned, these I have. I'm just using a damp rag. After I get done with the damp rag, I'm going to get another rag, and I have some leather conditioning oil. I'm just going to very lightly touch them up with that so they don't dry out. I've noticed on some of these pallets there's a little bit of junk at the pin position there. You can see it right here, and I'm not quite sure what it is. It's kind of soft, and I wonder if it's almost like a beeswax that they use to lubricate them. It's kind of soft and sticky, but I'm just going to clean that off and continue putting the pallets in. So all the pallet valves have been cleaned, ready to be put back in place. Before I did that, I blew out all of the reed cavities here with the air hose, and then came back with a vacuum cleaner just to make sure that there's no dirt in there. I don't want any dust or anything that could affect any of the reeds. So it's completely cleaned and now ready to put the pallets back in. I numbered them as before, and I have a number 1 on this end, so this one goes here. It just sits on the pin. You have to lift up this and put it on the hole, and then get it over the 2 pins. So number 1 is in place. Number 2, once again, when you're putting these in, you want to look from the side to make sure that the leather is not doubled over, because the leather is not glued on the end here. So if that gets doubled over, it will prevent it from sealing, and you'll have a key that won't stop playing. Here's a better video of the pallet installation. We take the next pallet by number. We need to move the spring out of the way. I don't want to rest on there. That's a sealing surface, so I want to be careful and just set it beside. Put the pallet in place again, making sure that the leather isn't doubled over on itself. And then just pull up the spring and lock it in the hole, and it's good to go. Before I flip it over, I'm just going to check to make sure each of these springs is inserted in the little hole. I want to make sure that they are seated properly. If not, if it were up and over a little bit, that might cause a little more tension for pushing down on the key. So I want to make sure that that's seated in the hole and that everything looks like it's in shape. And then we'll flip it over and start assembling the top side. Getting ready to insert the reeds. The first thing I'm going to do is take a soft brush, and brush each one gently. I'm going to brush from the root down here towards the stem. I don't want to brush the other way and accidentally catch the tongue and flip it up or bend it. But I want to make sure that there's no dirt alongside of the tongue. I don't think I'm going to do much more cleaning. I tried to brush some of this off. It doesn't come off very easily. I could put it in my ultrasonic cleaner, but I think I'll just give them a brush off and put them back in. The reeds are easy to insert. Basically, you just line them up with the slot, and you don't need the tool this time. You just need to push them in. Obviously, you want to make sure that you get them in the right number order and make sure they're all the way seated. Try not to scuff up or catch the edge of the felt here as you push them in. They should be a nice tight fit and airtight. Next one, same thing, you just line it up, slide it in and all the way, and good to go. Before I complete the assembly, I'm going to do a test. I've installed the bellows, I've installed the wind chest, and I've installed the mutes on each side, and then I have one pallet rod here. What I'm going to do is pump up the bellows and then open one side of the mutes, and then I will pump up the bellows, play the note, go to the next one, play the note, and so on. I'm going to test every single reed on the front side, then I'll close the front mutes, open the back mutes, and do the same. And that way, in case I do have a problem, it'll be easier to fix than having the whole thing completely assembled and having to take it apart to get down into this area again. Once the test is done, then I will complete the assembly of the reed bed and the pallet rods and move on to the next step. After a successful test, and I want to point out that when I was doing the test, anywhere where there's a hole into the wind chest, I covered it with tape so that it wouldn't suck air in through there. But after completing that test successfully, I'm going to now start to reinstall the pallet rods. Basically, you're just going to take each one, drop it down in place. Next one, and so on. You can also notice that I removed the mutes from both sides. I'm going to need to remove the mutes to put this pallet rack back in place. So I just took them off to get them out of the way. Once I get these pallet rods installed in these, then I can reinstall the mutes. All the pallet rods have been installed, and now it's time to reinstall the rack, which will be an exercise in patience. Basically, I'm going to fit one end and insert each pallet into the hole and just work my way from one end to the other. That wasn't too bad. I found the easiest thing to do is just apply pressure on the board down, and as you work your way across, you basically, because these are free to depress, you can depress this one, line it up with a hole, and put it in place. And then again, keep pressure on this side to keep them from popping back out. And then just go to the next one, push it down, and align it up with the hole, and it pops right in. Keep going all the way across, pushing each one down to get it lined up. So now that that's done, we're ready to reinstall the mutes, and then we can screw this in as well. These end pieces can be screwed in from underneath. Before installing each mute, I should mention that I brushed this off here. In this case, there's one little piece of, it looks like a small piece of wood that embedded itself in. I think I'm just going to leave that there rather than trying to pop it out. But you want to just make sure you clean off the leather so that you have a good seal. Now before I install the screws under here, I'm going to install the mutes so that I can move the board around a little bit if I need to. I've got this spring here which keeps the valves closed. Now the angle is actually down and in, so I'm going to have to twist this and stick it in place, and then once I've got that in place, then I'll put the screws in the hinges. I'll reinstall all the mutes all the way around and be ready for the next step. Now that the mutes are in on the front and back and both sides, treble and bass, we'll come around here, come up underneath, and we can put our 3 screws that hold the pallet rack in place. So that'll secure this piece right here. Next we're going to install the flappers for the swell. So when you press out the knee paddle, they lift these open to allow more volume. So they just slide in as they, similar to the way they came out. We're just going to engage them in the slots. Slide them all the way in. Tricky to get them going evenly. Once they're in all the way, we will hook them back up with these hooks. So we have the front one, which we just put in, and the back one. To finish up the wind chest and the reed bed and the pallet racks, we're going to reinstall the knee paddle linkages. Install the brace here for the, goes in right there. You can see where the shadow from the dust is. The keyboard bracket that holds up the center of the keyboard, and then these lifters that go on the ends of the flaps here. These are a problem. You can see they're got like a leather wrap on the end, and you can see where they're worn. So rather than the problem is when the paddle tries to lift it. So basically that piece there is going to rub against here to lift it. What happens is there's a low spot, so it has trouble getting past that low spot. So I'm going to need to figure out something to replace those so that the operation is smooth again. So the linkage is pretty easy to insert. It just goes underneath here. I might need to lift up the pallet valve, or the mute. Lift up the mute to get it under there. And then we have three. This piece here holds the front, and then we have two little pieces here. They go to hold the this side of the rod down here. So one goes there, and another one goes there.